everyone, welcome back. For today's video, I am going to be talking about my favorite trait of the INFJ personality, and that is our telepathic abilities. The way that we can read into people's minds and sort of know what they're thinking. I want to dive into the psychology behind this specifically and see things through this typology perspective. Why are we like this? And some of the challenges that come with being someone who is very empathically attuned. I'll talk about my experience and just all the goodies that you need to know about this trait of ours. So I think a big part of this trait, I will just explain how it works, has to do with our sensitivity. The INFJ personality is one of the most sensitive types, and intuitive DOMs in general generally tag to be more sensitive. And this comes straight from the typology literature as well. We pick up on subtleties in our environment, like small social cues, little parts of behavior that you might just see and other people might not be seeing. And the way that intuitive DOMs work specifically is we will pick up on all these small social cues subconsciously and not even realize it, and then sort of create this big overall impression of a person. And from there, we can draw really quick conclusions, like insightful information about that person. And it comes to our awareness in a way that's very unusual. It's just like an intuitive hunch. You just have this knowing about a person. You don't know where it came from or why you feel that way. And it's just out of the blue. It just kind of pops into your mind. So I think INFJs often walk through this world in a very backwards way, in that we only need like a few sensory details and to draw this big, massive conclusion and get this big impression about a person. I personally am socially slow in a way. Like I tend to not really be in the moment when it comes to like social interactions, but afterwards I tend to pick up on all kinds of information about a person based on their tonality, what they said, what they didn't say, just all kinds of small information that leads to knowing more about them than maybe they're even comfortable with. So that's generally how I work. I think there's a lot of other sensitive personality types. Like I think ESFPs can be very sensitive as well, and they're very opposite to us in terms of their cognitive functions. They tend to be more in the moment and aware of their sensory details, but they just process it differently. So oftentimes ESFPs especially can be very socially savvy people and are very good actors for that reason. I think ESFPs especially can be like more chameleon than INFJs even, just because of how they are able to understand an environment and move through it very fluidly. It's not a unique thing to INFJ personalities, but I would say that overall what is unique to us is just being able to read very deep insight into the people around us. So navigating this sensitive trait can always be very challenging, especially when you're a kid. I've always been a sensitive person, and when I was growing up, I just had this heightened sense of awareness, and my mirror neurons, I think especially, are just very overactive, and that's just genetic to me. I think there's both like a nature and nurture component when it comes to sensitivity, but I think it becomes a little more apparent when you are growing up around people who are maybe less sensitive than you. You might have friends or family members. You can just have all these misunderstandings take place in different social settings. If you are with somebody who is less sensitive and you're talking to another person, and say that you're picking up on all these cues like, oh, they don't really want to talk about this topic, or they're trying to make an escape, you're making them very uncomfortable. You just can't really communicate that in the moment because you're reading the energy of the situation, but your less sensitive friend or family member is not seeing that. Then it can be really confusing. Like, why aren't we just bringing this underlying energy to the surface and talking about it? I think that's one of the major challenges of being someone who is kind of a mind reader, socially sensitive to the energy of a situation. There's all these very small kind of things taking place under the surface, and you can't really bring it up because it might make the situation very awkward. I want to talk a little more about this because I think this is something that we have to learn to navigate, though, if we want to live comfortably in this world. So I want to talk a little bit about extroverted feeling, and this is our auxiliary function of the INFJ personality. It is the main function that is responsible for making us more attuned to people and their needs, behavioral cues, and kind of the small energy exchanges that we experience on the day-to-day. And that's the microcosmic experience of extroverted feeling. There's also the macrocosmic experience of extroverted feeling, which is all about archetypes and seeing the collective experience and overarching narratives when it comes to humans and behavior. So INFJs have both. We have this kind of microcosmic experience of being able to see people one-on-one very clearly and kind of insightfully understand them at a very deep level. And then the more macrocosmic type of experience, which is seeing how things will pan out in their future based on their present behavior, what is going to happen to them and what happens if they don't correct certain things, especially. We have both of these things sort of ingrained in us, I think, both at the neurological level and also because we are, generally speaking, very curious people when it comes to psychology and why we act certain ways. So there's both this kind of nature and nurture component. So it depends on the psychology model that you are using for personality typing, but generally speaking, extroverted feeling is also how we make decisions. And we usually look at things like the group values and the overall energy and feel of a situation. We are harmonizers, and we like to try to create harmony on both like the microcosmic, like with our regular social interactions, and then also just on the macrocosmic. We generally put ourselves into humanitarian types of fields. I think that is a very key insight to our personality type, is that extroverted feeling is all about people. Because of that, I think you should take the time to study people. Things like psychology and philosophy and literature in general. I think it's really important to glean insight from your own experiences. You will be doing that anyway. And it's better to do that consciously and with intention than constantly be reading into other people's behaviors and things of that nature, just kind of impulsively and not really understand why you're doing it. So I think it's good to lead with intention, like take some solid time out of your days to really reflect and think about the interactions that you had and what went well and what didn't go well and what you liked about certain people and what you didn't like. I especially get into the details of it too. Understand people at the deepest of levels, psychology and the human experience, understand things like the shadow and projection, all of these insightful different learnings that you can get. I think that ends up being really satisfying to INFJs. Like I personally went through the vast majority of my life not really understanding why it was I was really reading into things. Only like in my later years have I decided to actually sit down and take the time to study it. I think it's really important to do that because it can help with your regular day-to-day interactions as well. Just bringing things to people's awareness in a way that's a little more socially savvy. Have these interactions go a lot smoother when you can actually understand what's going on. Honestly, it's still something that I'm trying to learn to navigate when it comes to, especially like everyday kind of people that I don't necessarily need to have a close relationship with. And I think that's another thing to understand about yourself too, is just like pick people who you know will actually value your insight that you give them. I think oftentimes we are in situations where people just aren't really worth it. You could give them an insightful tidbit, but they might not be wanting it. I think in situations like that, it's just best to lead with a question and like ask very open-ended questions that will allow that person to reach their own kind of conclusions if they have some kind of impulsive behavior that's toxic. But I think outside of that, it's very useful for relationships if you are someone who can get into other people's minds and just kind of understand why they are feeling a certain emotion. We end up being very intimate personality types because of that. I personally love experiencing people's energy when it is on a more positive side. I don't really like using the word energy, first of all, because there are these kind of like hippie connotations to it, but that really is the experience. I feel people almost like they are a song in a way of just like they have this tone and this mood and lyrics, what they're saying, and want those things to harmonize well when you're around them. I think another incredibly painful thing for people who are more sensitive, energetically sensitive, is that they can feel things like passive aggressiveness times 10 because their words aren't matching their energy in a way. And so like if somebody's saying something nice but with a tone, we definitely feel that. And it's really hard to try to communicate with mixed signals. Like, do I talk to this person's mean energy or do I talk to the words they just said? And you kind of have to pick one. Like, I'm just going to talk to their energy. It seems like they're being really mean, so I'll just start talking to that. Or you can go off with their actual words that they're saying, but then there will be this big, massive misunderstanding. Social scenarios like that are always incredibly painful for INFJs. But when it comes to energy and what it really is just kind of this big overall impression of a person. And I think music is one way to see it that way. It's just like this person has this kind of general beat to who they are. So I would say that probably the best way to refine the skill, if you want to, and to get better at this supposed mind reading type of trait that we have, is to always be curious. First of all, I think especially when it comes to mind reading, it's kind of a dangerous territory. Like, you don't ever want to assume that you're reading somebody's mind. It's always good to just approach it with curiosity and not presumption. I would say that a lot of my friends who think that they're really good at reading people are actually really terrible at it. The reason for that is because they are just projecting their own shadows onto that person, or projecting what they want them to be thinking, and projecting all kinds of things that might not be true because they're not actually looking at that person with deep empathy and curiosity. So I think that's the number one blocker to having a more refined trait when it comes to this kind of intuitive feeling. I would say that paired with that is knowing your projections and like your own shadow. Like, what are things that I generally project onto people? And am I actually seeing them with clarity? Because the only way that you can really truly see a person is if you're willing to sort of take off your own blinders and actually try to experience the wholeness of who they are. So I think it's just good to know that about yourself. Like, trust your gut, but also test it and try to make sure that you are just drawing the right conclusions. I think especially when you are just maybe getting a big signal about a person, like that there might be dangerous, or maybe just kind of these more negative associations that you might have with certain people, it's good to understand where that big impression might be coming from. I'm not saying like don't trust your gut, but it's definitely something that you need to be cautious about, especially when you are an intuitive Dom. Trying to understand where certain conclusions came from can be a real challenge. For me personally, I tend to not really remember sensory details very well, and it's extremely hard for me to find concrete examples in my past. And especially when I drew a conclusion about a person, I just have no idea where many of my insights came from. And so it's often like a very emotionally tolling process as well. Like, say that I was perceiving somebody to be kind of dangerous. It's incredibly hard for me to try to get into the emotion of the experience. And then from there, I have to try to figure out what it was about them that made me feel like they might be someone not to be around. Like small things like tonality, maybe what they said, what they didn't say, and just kind of those small cues that and patterns that I just don't really know. And so it's incredibly hard to dig into my intuition and find all those extra sensory details that led to a certain idea. Anyway, I am going to stop right there, and I'm very interested in what your guys' experiences have been when it comes to this mind reading trait. What are times that you feel like you're really accurate and on point with what a person's thinking? What are times that you feel like you're way off, and what contributes to that? I want to know your thoughts, so let me know, and I will be back here hopefully next week. I am trying to put out weekly videos, but sometimes I am just a little delayed because I have stuff going on the weekend. So every week I am trying to put out a video. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.